Well, welcome to Pat McGart on the hills of Donegal. Are you well this
Morning,
morning,
Jude.
Pat?
Very well. And it's the only thing I can say is see we do in our daily weather report. It's not raining.
Well, it's not raining here either. It was very nice
Yeah.
when I was out this morning. It was just absolutely beautiful.
Well, start as you mean you continue, so we'll go on.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of the newspapers or websites today, Pat, or a couple of items from them. The one that caught my eye was this one. I think I sent you an email on it from the newsletter, and it's a confidential government memo from 1988. Now, I don't know if that's the freedom of information or whatever it is that it applies after a certain period of time that all sorts of private stuff gets.
That's the 30-year rule.
Yeah. So it's Bishop Daly, and he's talking about. He was talking to a man called, I think, Kevin Holohan, who was worked for the Department of External Affairs, and he was talking at, I don't know, some get-together, chatting about Martin McGuinness. And he said about Martin McGuinness that Martin McGuinness was he figured Martin McGuinness was more a hardliner, more committed to a military solution than to a political one. That's the first thing he said. And he said, it's supposed to have said, the most chilling thing he found about McGuinness was his lack of humour. Now, I'm going to get my shot in here first. One, the Chuckle Brothers. For God's sake, sure, everybody, not faulted, but they almost said it was a parody. Himself and Paisley laughing their behinds off. So I don't know where the lack of a sense of humour. The second thing is, as you know in my book, because you were part of it, Martin McGuinness, the man I knew, there wasn't a single person who talked about him as being a chilling sort of person. In fact, several of them compared him favourably with Gerry Adams. They said Gerry Adams was kind of cold and distant. I don't know if I can accept that either, but definitely McGuinness was warm and so on. But you're a man who knew Martin McGuinness well, much better than I did. How did you find him? Do you find them reflected in those words of Bishop Daly?
No, but Jude, when you sent it to me last night, I was trying to think, and then there's maybe an explanation that I can come up with that's halfway there. See, in the early days of the Trouble, I remember chatting to Martin one day, and I said, "Hey, Martin, how come you don't drink?" And he says, "Can you imagine?" He says, "Me drinking in the situation I'm in, and all the rest of it." Now, see, in the early days of the Troubles, there was so much going on in there, the Bloody Sunday and so on. I don't know if Martin. I'd say the stress he was under, the whole thing of the IRA and deaths and mayhem and all the rest. And he was very young. There was a lot of responsibility on his shoulders. And Martin took it very, very seriously. This was not a game for him. It was very, very serious. And so on. So maybe he sublimated his personality to the fact that it was just going to be, I am here, I'm going to do a job. It's serious, it's life and death, and there's no time for fooling around. Now, that's the only explanation, Jude. But I know for a fact the Martin McGuinness I knew, to use the title of your book, was a very different person. He was actually very warm and very friendly. See, when you got talking to Martin used to come into the office, and sometimes he'd sit there for an hour, and he would chat away, and he was far. He would chat, and by the way, everybody thinks the only thing he'd chat about is politics. Martin chatted about everything under the sun, and anybody that sort of got to know him would have thought. Apparently, he would walk around when he was Minister of Education, walk around with his hands in his pocket and stop and chat to the cleaners, the what do you call it, the officials, and all the rest of it. They said he was the warmest, and I think it took a lot of the unionists by surprise that here was the guy with the two heads that they read about was actually a very warm, down to earth. And I think Paisley eventually found that out as well. And the final part about this, Jude, is remember was Talkback when Martin died? Young Ian Ogue went on and said I actually paid warm tribute to Martin McGuinness. So, maybe there's the perception and the reality.
Well, I suppose I was thinking maybe, like you said, early days. Perhaps he was fairly humorless. But of course, like if you're in a life and death situation, as you've intimated, it's not surprising you're not going to find cracking jokes. But certainly when he became political, I remember reading the description of him going to his office as Minister for Education for the first time. And he goes in, and I can still see the little film clip where he goes in again, he's his hands in his pockets, and he looks into the office, he says, nice desk. And then they sent him and this is on the record. They asked him, what would you like us to call you, Mr. McGuinness? So we refer to you as Mr. McGuinness or Minister, and he says, Martin will do grand. And this sort of took them aback a little bit. That he just wanted to be an ordinary guy, you know?
Yeah.
I thought, McGuinness, he was a very astute guy. I'm not suggesting that he put these things on. I think we've all got sides to our personality. Part of us is a gloomy bugger. Part of us is a warm, cheerful guy. Part of us is a life and soul of the party. So it all depends on the circumstances. And I think certainly in his later stages, Martin McGuinness was able to show the sunny side of his disposition, his character.
Yeah. Well, when you think back on it, he was a very young guy and in charge of, definitely in charge of the area and Derry back in the day. And it was, what was going on then, Jude was heavy duty, you know. Now, Martin was a hardliner. Martin, in the early days, he told me, but it's not on the record, I'm not saying anything unique here, that the deaths of two guys, friends of his or people he knew, changed him. And he said he told me that he was apolitical. He grew up in an apolitical house, but after the British Army killed those two guys, he says, wait a minute, he said the other thing, he said the total lack of respect shown to our leaders, the nationalist community leaders, that's what we were talking about, by the RUC when they battened the people off the street, and Eddie McAteer and people actually got walloped as well. He said, but brought home to him, what's the point in trying to talk? You know, the only way they're going to listen is through a retort, you know, sort of a blow for a blow. So, you know, and he joined the IRA back then, and it was a really, really tough time. There's no, Jude, when you consider the background, all the killings in Derry, the Bloody Sunday, the shootings, and you know. And he was only in his early 20s back then. Sure, he saw he was known as the boy general and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So and Martin, I would have thought, you see, his whole personality wouldn't have developed at that stage. He would have been young. He would have been under pressure. He would have, and he just saw one focus, United Ireland, and he wasn't for deviating. And maybe, but Daly saw at that stage was, hey, this young fella is just single-minded. You know, he's tunnel visioned and all that, and there's probably an element of truth in that.
But I mean, if you stop to think about it, like if supposing McGuinness had been, say, a colonel or a general in the British Army, and somebody was to say of him, "Oh, he's a hardliner. He's more committed to military things than he is to political," and nobody would say raise an eyebrow. You know,
no.
McGuinness was essentially a soldier for for the early part of his life. So if you're a soldier, why would you expect them to be interested in politics or, you know, to lean towards politics? Now, eventually in McGuinness's life, because of circumstances, he did enter politics. But at the time, I was going to say paramilitary, he was an IRA volunteer and very much involved. I mean, I sort of stating the obvious, it seems to me. And as I say, there's this thing, a total lack of humour. I don't think that had been the case even then. He might have chosen not to show it because he was too busy doing other things. The other point, actually, in that interview, or that piece of that dossier that was written up by this man, Kevin Houlihan, was that Daly talked about Hume, and he said, John Hume, he had complete faith in John Hume, like most Derry people. We weren't sure what was going on, but we accepted that John knew best.
Yeah.
I thought, I think, A, that's probably true, but B, it's actually sort of infantilizing people a wee bit, you know?
Yeah.
Where you say, it's like Big Brother knows best. You know, and this is the attitude many people had with Thatcher, you know, Thatcher, strong woman, she knows what she's doing, you know, we'll vote for her.
Yeah. No, Jude, there's no, Daly, like, without question, John Hume and Daly were very, very close. And the SDLP was like the Catholic Church's version of politics. You know, there's very little doubt about that. The SDLP reflected very much the position of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church reflected very much the position of the SDLP. That's not a genius thing to say. So Hume, I'd say Daly and Hume would have been an almost daily communication on the big issues and so on. And Daly, without question, would have accepted Hume's analysis. I've no doubt about that. That's the way it was back then. The Catholic Church, there were individual members of the Catholic Church, but there were very few on the ground who would have been supportive of maybe the Sinn Féin position. But there were very few, by and large. Very few. Pierce O'Doodle and people like that, possibly. And maybe Raymond Murray in Belfast, but that would have been about it. And the Catholic Church spent most of its time condemning republicanism, and it's got a long history of condemning republicanism.
Yeah.
So Martin McGuinness wouldn't have been a frequent visitor to Bishop Daly's home, I would hardly think.
No. A little thought struck me actually. This was a confidential government memo written in May 1988, where Kevin Holohan from the Department of External Affairs even quotes Bishop Daly in a casual conversation. Is this what these guys do all the time? So if I'm talking in a pub to a member of the Department of External Affairs, anything I say may be written down and later in 30 years' time may be used in evidence against me.
Jude, remember the British guy who said Donald Trump, the ambassador to Washington, who said basically in a private or confidential memo that somehow got leaked that Donald Trump was an idiot. Sure, he lost his job. It showed how much Boris Johnson, by the way, how much loyalty he had, that a man whose job it was to report to the British government, who told the truth, that the minute he lost his job.
But my point, Pat, is this is, Bishop Daly's talking. I suppose he's an important person. But you just get the sense, was it because he was Bishop Daly that the guy, is that what they do? Do they go home after the sort of social get-togethers or whatever and write stuff up and feed it into the system?
Jude, Patrick, I think it was Patrick May who came down to the Journal came down and visited. And I think the British the unions weren't talking to the Brits after the Anglo-Irish Agreement. But one guy left. I should have held on. And one guy left a file behind, and there was a whole wee bit about me in it. But that he's a Donegal man. So these people record basically it was a briefing document for Mayhew, who I was.
Really?
And these guys, these are. They're diplomats. They are civil servants. They go around and say, "Look, Minister, here's what this guy thinks. Off for record, this is what he said," and it's all recorded. And then under the 30-year rule, some of it's redacted, but a lot of it gets chucked out there. So anything you said to a civil servant 30 years ago, look out.
I wasn't in a position to talk to civil servants more recently. Anyway, it was a very interesting item. And as you say, maybe a side of McGuinness emerged later on rather than was obvious at the time. The other item, as we're running out of time already, is the RTE News Now website, which is a very good one, actually. I have a little app and I go to it regularly, and it's quite up to date all the time. And it talks about a review that's been done for the protection of vulnerable victims in sexual offence cases, and says that the vulnerable victims in such cases, they should recommend anonymity for those charged with the crime of rape in this case, I guess. Now, I personally would support that completely. I think once you say so-and-so's in court because he's up on a rape charge, it's very hard for people to get that thought out of their head, even if in the end of it, he emerges innocent, totally innocent.
Yeah.
But the most interesting thing I find about it is there's very little talk. In fact, there's talk the opposite way about the victim. Yeah. Very often, I'd say this is almost universal. The victims of sexual rape or sexual assault are very often kept anonymous.
Yeah.
Now, I just don't understand that. Now, we're talking about the victim.
Hold on, Judy. Are you saying the victims, that they should be named?
Well, why would you not name them? Like, if it's a victim of any other crime, suppose it was a victim of a hit-and-run accident, would you try to hide their name? Or if it was somebody who had been burgled, would you try to hide their name?
You don't name the burglar in court, and you don't name that.
There's two things here. One is this report is talking about the anonymity for all who are charged with sexual offences. I go completely along with that.
But are you talking about people who are
I'm
charged?
I'm moving from that to something they don't really talk about much, and that is the question of identification of the person who's the victim of the sexual crime. Somebody who was raped, for example.
Why would you name the victim?
Well, let me ask you this. If there was a hit and run accident, would the person be named? Who was a victim of it?
Unless they were killed.
Surely if it said so-and-so is in hospital, if it was a big enough case.
No, you don't know.
There'd be no hesitation about giving the name of the person. And likewise, if somebody was burgled, they would say, you know, so-and-so's house.
No, Jude, I totally disagree with that. Right, say you had a daughter, and I think you have. I don't have a daughter. Yes, say she was raped.
Yeah.
Why should she be named? You know,
why not?
Number one, she's the victim of a crime.
Yes.
And then there's the wee girl. So and everybody can point. There's the wee girl that was raped.
Yes.
And all the rest. No. But hold on. She did not do anything wrong. She's the victim. Why should she be held up? You know. By the way, and a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, when you're the victim of rape, you're also then victimized for getting raped. So there's that the whole thing.
Hey, you put your finger on it. And this thing about getting raped and it's your fault and it was your fault.
That's exactly the point.
Feminists, and I would support them in this, would say that this notion that she was asking for it is outrageous. And I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. You know, any notion of blaming the victim just makes my blood boil. And I'm saying that this not naming of the victim is a part of that. I think that's sort of shoring up this notion that in some way a victim of rape is sort of to blame in some way. I think that's ridiculous. And by keeping the victim anonymous, they are supporting that and continuing that.
But I think what you're doing there is to get to Dublin, you go around by Galway. You know that why. You know, that what you're talking about is the idealized world version, but that's not the reality. If say there's a house down there about 30 yards from, like say there's somebody down there gets raped, I can give you a guarantee everybody in this neighborhood will go, well, there's the wee girl got raped, and like
yes, what is that saying? Like, yeah, well, what is that saying? Are they saying it's something to do? Are you suggesting they think less of her because she was raped?
Well, put it like this: our life's never going to be the same again.
No.
Whereas if it's not mentioned, and somebody else, and it's her family get a chance to deal with it, and they sort of out amongst them. No.
It's rarely. I disagree with a very wise man like you. But look, if you wouldn't say that you think less of a person because they're the victim of a burglary, or you wouldn't think less of a person because they're a victim of a hit and run accident. Then why would you think less of a person because they were raped?
You're deliberately misleading. Like, if you get a scar in your face, do you want everybody pointing it out to you? You know.
Where's the scar? There's no. What you're talking about is something vile that has been done to you.
That's just Irish society. And if somebody gets raped, we're a small community. And that person is going to stand out like a cross up on a hill, or everybody's going to be talking about it. And any family or the victim of rape, who needs that?
I disagree, but I agree with you insofar as many people would be pointing the finger and so on. But I do seriously believe I don't understand why the feminists don't make more of a case for this. Is that what? It's implying that in some way the victim is to blame, and I really, really reject that. And now, in the light of that, I'm going to have to say, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to come back on that now, because we're going to.
Yeah, right. Right. There's two things. It's the whole idea of anonymity was to protect the victim. But point two, just a quick one. There was years ago. I remember a cop I knew. They arrested this guy. He had. I'm not going to details or where, but he had been abusing kids and all the rest of it. And they arrested him very publicly and all the rest. And I said to the cop, why'd you do that? He says, Pat, we know we'll never, ever get a conviction against this guy. But we deliberately done it so people know that what he is. So there's 2 or 3 things going on and all this sort of stuff about anonymity. It's a big issue, Jude.
I know the anonymity now, but you're talking once again about the criminal, not about the victim. And that's my point. Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it there, Pat. Most
Okay,
enjoyable.
Jude.
Okay, all the best.
All the best, Jude.